Thank you for my fellow panelists for coming and taking the time. It's a privilege to be among such distinguished panelists and to have this opportunity. As you know, maybe I just say a word about the Dravidian Professionals Forum. We set this up a few years ago because we wanted to reinvigorate the intellectual component of the Dravidian political movement and to return to the core ideas and ideology and find a platform to debate them and to look at a century later new interpretations and new manifestations in policy of an ideology that has stayed constant for a century. That itself is a big achievement. As you know, very few political or socio-political movements persist for that length of time. But coming back to the topic of hand, I think Dharani has encapsulated some of the basic issues. I was on some TV station, I forget which one recently, and I said, we have a crime problem as a finance minister and as a personnel administrative reforms portfolio holder as well, which we now call human resource management. Overall, the nature of government is, in relative to my experience as a banker, first an investment banker in the US and then a commercial global banker in emerging markets, the system is profoundly under, what can I say, designed and under-resourced. We have very little continuity. We have very little real-time information. Files move by paper still. We're on the way to making them electronic. Institutional memory doesn't exist. Officers come and go. Records are sparse. I sat for 5 years as an opposition MLA and looked at CAG reports as part of the Public Accounts Committee. They're 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 8 years late, and nothing gets done about it. So we have created a system where, you know, the classic notions of organizational design, of infrastructure, of institutional memory, of institutional learning, of institutional growth, of accountability, of alignment of incentives, all of these basically are either decaying or decayed. And therefore, it's not surprising, in my opinion, beyond corruption or beyond the morality of politics, there's a structural weakness in the system in terms of what the job requires and what the system provides. In that sense, this is a particularly inopportune time to be having this kind of unnecessary fight about who gets to dictate what. As I also said in the interview, beyond any considerations of state versus state versus union or party A versus party B, we are still a democracy, and it's very contrary to the notions of a democracy that any officer can be forced to do anything against their will. Now, one could argue that transfers internally within the state are to some extent not with the consent of particular officers. But you know, that's what officers sign up for. When you sign up for the cadre of a state, you expect to be rotated within that state. And both in terms of climate or complexity of your life or you know, the ability to keep your family still in your old place and go to the new place and come back and go. It's not that hard to get internal postings and transfers within a state. Of course, it's a whole different ballgame where you to get suddenly called up to Delhi one day. So in that sense, I would go so far as to say that both because of the timing of this move and because of the bad history, the instance on West Bengal cited earlier by Dharani, I think that this is a very, you know, unfortunate development with the wrong motivations. Because if really the union government was worried about the number of officers, why did they not scale up the pipeline over the last 7 years of sitting in office? To be fair, the previous governments didn't do so either, so I'm not blaming them only. But surely it didn't dawn on them all of a sudden one day that there's a shortage of officers. They could have done something about it over the last 7 years. The second point I'd like to make that is this is the same government that said they were going to go gung-ho for lateral entry to make up for administrative kind of shortfall. And they've done it to some extent, not so much as they promised. But if lateral entry is a solution, and if you have not bothered to expand the pipeline, then really you have no moral standing to now come and demand that people come whenever you say so. So were I to put on my kind of politician's hat, I would say this is, a case of really bad intent. The intent to have kind of megalomaniacal control of everything, of the whole country, which is not even ownable, it is not executable. Just because you accumulate power does not mean you can actually get results, right? So this kind of a system would not only result in too much concentration of power in one hand or two hands, it would disrupt the functioning of state governments, where office bearers would worry that any day if they did too good a job, they could get pulled. And effectively, it would create, in my understanding, though I'm not an officer myself, just looking at it from outside, an environment of fear and uncertainty, which would greatly debilitate morale and performance on a daily basis. What's really surprising to me is why this has become a BJP versus not BJP state issue. I mean, it's ludicrous that this should have anything to do with politics. This is clearly against the principles of democracy, against the principle of freedom of labor, who wants to work at what and when. It's clearly against federalism, it's against states' rights. Every way, it's against that. So why is it that BJP states don't see that? I mean, if it's not as if we are all the same political alignment. It's not as if we are all in the same, kind of political coalition. And yet we understand the implications of this. How is it that the UPs and the Bihars and the, Gujarats, even for that matter, how come they don't see it? How come they don't understand it? Or have they sacrificed the interests of administration and state and the people of their state at the altar of the great leader? And therefore they say, yes, sir, 3 bags full to whatever is proposed. In fact, I'll go one step further on that. I can guarantee you, and I would request anybody to challenge me, that were the current Prime Minister the Chief Minister of Gujarat, he would have absolutely blown a fuse. He would have thrown a complete fit if such a document had been sent to the state of Gujarat from the union government, even if it had been an NDA government in Delhi, let alone if it had been a UPA government. So, if I say in conclusion, one kind of negative problem and one kind of call to action. This is the kind of ongoing accumulation of power without accountability, without answerability, without even results. It is debilitating for a country to see so much power being accumulated in 1 or 2 hands. And the consequences of, to people's lives are miserable and have been evident for several years. Joblessness, lack of growth, lack of progress, in some cases through bad policies like demonetization, starvation, lack of education, so forth. So this is another worrying kind of event in an otherwise very destabilizing and anti-democratic movement. On the positive side, what I would say is that this is a wake-up call, at least as far as Tamil Nadu is concerned. I have been saying for some time now as the portfolio minister that our recruitment system and our staffing system is fundamentally broken. Forget about the UPSC and the IAS officers. I'm talking about the government of Tamil Nadu, its subsidiaries, its PSUs, its corporations and municipalities and its universities and entities. And the whole model of government staffing and recruitment is profoundly disjointed. Right now, we have something about a 35 or 38% vacancy rate in the number of allotted seats in government, which is a bit of a joke. So the allotment really means nothing. Neither could we afford to pay all of them if we appointed them, nor is it clear there's that much work to be done. So, the one aspect of the decay of administration overall is this lack of proper recruiting, proper, staffing, proper evaluation and promotion procedures. We have the seniority system where the rank you got on the TNPSC, let's say 30 years ago, determines where you are in the promotion roster. It's ludicrous, it's ridiculous. No other entity in the world, no other corporation, no other kind of market force subject entity will allow that. Even most governments will have some component for performance and other variables in the course of your career rather than your score on an exam 30 years back. So in that sense, we have already started doing a lot of reform in Tamil Nadu. And I think these kinds of events being forced on us by otherwise not so friendly government will just be an accelerant. And if I may say, just as one last thing, more as a kind of in a note of sadness rather than as a political point. This notion that somehow a decision can be made in Delhi and then propagated to 1.4 billion people without discussion, without any input, without any worry that 10 minds and 5 debates might have yielded a better outcome than one random stroke by one person on one day. This notion that somehow there is this God complex, that somebody is all-knowing, all-seeing, and all-powerful, and if they say so, it should happen. This notion is the really worrying notion for me, and this is another facet of that notion. So with that, maybe let me stop and thank all the other panelists again, and then just mute myself and go off screen. And I look forward very much to hearing the other panelists who have lived this life. I'm just looking at it from the outside. So it'll be much more enlightening to hear from people who've been there and done that. Thank you.